We had known the path to the abandoned cabin since childhood, a faint scar winding through the edge of the Whispering Weald. Elias, his face already mapping the stress of a failed business, believed this retreat was the only way to clear his head. He led with a frantic energy, his eyes too bright, his knuckles white as he gripped his walking stick. I, Thomas, followed, a cynical journalist who usually found comfort in facts, but found none in the heavy, unnatural stillness that had settled over the forest since we crossed the ancient stone boundary. We were seeking silence, but the silence we found was wrong. "It's just too quiet," I muttered, breaking the oppressive calm. No bird song, no rustling of small animals, just the muffled thump of our boots and the groan of ancient branches rubbing together like brittle bones. "That's the point, isn't it?" Elias snapped, not looking back, but his voice lacked conviction. He kept checking his watch, though the sun seemed trapped in an eternal gray twilight beneath the dense canopy. The trail began to disappear, swallowed by roots that twisted across the earth like serpentine muscles. As dusk bled into the woods, the fog arrived. It was sudden and thick, a cold, wet breath that clung to our skin and blurred the edges of reality. Elias slowed, his stick tapping tentatively now. "Elias," whispered his voice trembling, "what is that smell?" It wasn't decay, it was worse. It smelled of old copper, wet fur, and an ancient musk that seemed to set the air itself on edge. Then, the first unexpected thing happened. The ground beneath us shifted. It didn't feel like an earthquake. It felt like something breathing deeply. We stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby oak for support. But the bark didn't feel like wood. It was strangely warm and gave slightly under our grip, like stretched, leathery skin. Elias yanked his hand back with a gasp. "It's not real! None of this is real!" A sound rose from the mist, a low, melodic hum that wasn't human, yet carried a sickening mimicry of sorrow. We pushed forward, driven by a primal need to escape the pulsing ground, until the trees abruptly parted. There, in a small clearing, was a sight that stopped our hearts. A perfect concentric circle of deer skulls, bleached white and facing inward. And in the very center, stuck into the earth, was Elias's own pocket knife, the one he had lost years ago. "How?" Elias breathed, stepping toward it like a sleepwalker. Before I could grab him, the mist directly in front of us solidified. It wasn't a shadow, it was a figure, impossibly tall, stretching far above the treetops. It stood on two legs that were too thin, too skeletal to support its mass. Its body was a cage of bone and matted dark fur, pulsing with a faint bioluminescent light. It had no face, only a vertical slit that opened to reveal rows of needle-like teeth and eyes that reflected the dim light like cold, dead stars. It leaned down, its neck elongating like a snake's, until its faceless head was level with ours. And then it opened its maw, and in a perfect, distorted mimicry of Elias's voice, it whispered, "Welcome home, Thomas." The creature didn't pounce, it didn't roar, it simply drifted backward into the thickening fog, its spindly limbs moving with a sickening, liquid grace that defied the laws of biology. Elias stood paralyzed, his eyes locked on his own lost pocket knife protruding from the earth like a grave marker. I, Thomas, felt a jolt of adrenaline overcome my shock. I lunged forward, grabbing Elias by the shoulder and hauling him toward a narrow limestone crevice in the rising cliffside. "Move, Elias, now!" I hissed, my voice cracking under the weight of the copper-scented air. We scrambled into the dark, jagged crack in the rock, the walls slick with a translucent, pulsing sap that felt warm against our palms. Outside, the forest erupted, not with the sound of wind, but with 1,000 overlapping voices, all of them ours. It was a cacophony of our own private conversations, whispered secrets, and even the sounds of our breathing from minutes ago, played back in a distorted metallic loop. "Thomas, help me! It's so cold!" A voice sobbed from the mist. It sounded exactly like me, perfectly capturing the tremor of my own fear. Suddenly, a massive gray hand, 4 joints long and tipped with obsidian needles, slid into the crevice. It didn't grab blindly. It felt the walls with a delicate sensory precision, searching for us like a spider testing its web. Each time its talons scraped the stone, it produced a high-pitched spark that illuminated the narrow space. "It's not hunting by sight," Elias whispered, his breath hitching as he pressed his back against the pulsating stone. "It's hunting by the vibration of the heart." As he spoke, the ground beneath us began to liquefy. It wasn't mud, it was a black tar-like bog that smelled of ancient bile. We began to sink, our boots trapped in the viscous grip of the earth. From the canopy above, the creature's faceless head descended through the crack, its neck elongating like a pale, fleshy snake. Its vertical mouth peeled back, revealing not just teeth, but a row of human molars, my teeth, arranged in a mockery of a smile. It leaned in until its cold, star-like eyes were inches from mine, and the forest voices suddenly went silent, replaced by a single wet heartbeat that filled the entire cavern. The black bog didn't just swallow our legs, it began to hum, a low-frequency vibration that resonated in our teeth. As we sank deeper, the rock walls of the crevice began to soften and pulse. I fumbled for my heavy-duty flashlight, clicking it on. The beam sliced through the rising steam, revealing a horror that my journalistic mind refused to categorize. The walls weren't stone. They were a dense, compressed mosaic of faces, hundreds of them, stacked like cordwood, their skin turned to a translucent amber-like parchment. They weren't dead. Their eyes tracked the light of my flash, pupils dilating in a slow, agonizing, synchronized rhythm. They were the lost of Blackwood, woven into the very geology of the forest. "Thomas, my feet! I can't feel my feet anymore," Elias gasped. He wasn't just sinking, he was merging. The black bile was stitching itself into his hiking boots, turning the leather into something that looked like charred muscle. Above us, the vertical hunter, that spindly, faceless titan, didn't strike. It watched with a terrible, patient curiosity. It began to hum, a sound that mimicked the exact frequency of the bog. As it sang, the walls of faces began to moan in harmony, a collective sound of centuries-old grief that vibrated the air until blood began to leak from my ears. "Look at its chest, Elias! Look at the cage!" I, Thomas, shouted, pointing the light at the creature's translucent torso. Inside its rib cage, suspended in a thick, glowing fluid, was a heart the size of a boulder. But it wasn't a heart, it was a knot of human limbs, twitching and grasping at the interior of the creature's chest. Every time the creature spoke in our voices, one of the limbs would jerk in a spasmodic reflex. Suddenly, a root, or perhaps a finger, erupted from the bog between us. It was tipped with a human namefold, overgrown and sharp. It sliced through Elias's jacket, and instead of blood, a thick golden sap began to ooze from the wound. "It's changing us," Elias whispered, his voice losing its human timbre and becoming hollow like wind through a pipe. "We aren't being eaten, we're being harvested." The hunter leaned closer, its vertical maw opening so wide it split its entire head in two. From the darkness of its throat, a long, wet tongue emerged.
Not a tongue, but a human hand reaching out to stroke Elias's cheek with a father's tenderness.
The human hand emerging from the creature's throat didn't claw at Elias. It cradled his jaw with a sickening, familiar warmth. As the fingers brushed his skin, the golden sap leaking from his wound began to harden, turning his flesh into a translucent, amber-like bark. He didn't scream anymore. His mouth remained open, but the sound that came out was the rhythmic, mechanical ticking of a clock, the sound from his childhood bedroom that only he and I, Thomas, could have known. "Elias, look at me! Stay with me!" I yelled, my own legs now encased up to the knees in the pulsing black mire. The vertical hunter leaned its skeletal frame further into the crevice, its ribs expanding like a bellows. With every breath it took, the mosaic of faces in the walls inhaled in unison. The air became so thick with the scent of ozone and rotting lilies that I began to hallucinate. I saw the forest not as trees and dirt, but as a single vast nervous system, and we were nothing more than fresh cells being grafted onto a dying limb. "It's beautiful, Thomas," Elias whispered, but it wasn't his voice. It was a chorus of 100 whispers, perfectly synchronized. "The forest isn't hungry, it's just lonely." His skin was now a patchwork of moss and muscle. The black bog began to rise faster, swirling around us in a centrifugal motion. Below the surface, I felt cold, wet things, smaller versions of the hunter's limbs wrapping around my ankles, stitching my socks into my skin. Then came the most terrible event of all. The creature reached into its own translucent chest, its obsidian talons slicing through its parchment skin. It pulled out one of the twitching human limbs from its heart knot and held it out to me. The limb was small, pale, and bore a distinctive silver birthmark on the wrist. My sister's hand. She had vanished in these woods 20 years ago. The hand didn't limp, it beckoned. The fingers curled in the exact way she used to signal me to follow her into the garden. The hunter's vertical maw split wider, and a sound erupted that shattered my flashlight lens, a pure, undistorted recording of my sister laughing. "She's still in there," Elias murmured, his eyes now turning into the same silver coin mirrors as the monster's. "We can all be together now." The walls of faces began to lean outward, their amber skin stretching as they reached for us with wooden fingers. The hunter began to pull Elias upward, his body stretching like taffy, his spine clicking into the same elongated, multi-jointed shape as the beast. The transformation of Elias was no longer a process, it was an evolution. His spine didn't just snap, it elongated with a sound like a ship's mast splintering in a storm. His human silhouette vanished, replaced by a jagged, skeletal frame that mimicked the vertical hunter towering above us. He didn't scream because he no longer had a throat for it. His neck had stretched into a pulsing gray cord, his head a smooth, featureless bulb of translucent skin. "Elias," I whispered, the black bile reaching my chest, pinning my arms to my sides like an invisible straitjacket. The hunter didn't drop him, it merged with him. Their limbs intertwined, the silver-coined eyes of the beast blinking in perfect synchronization with the new, terrified eyes of what used to be my friend. The creature leaned down, its vertical maw mere inches from my face. The stench of ozone and old copper was overwhelming, a physical weight on my lungs. From the darkness of its throat, my sister's hand reached out once more. This time, it held a small, glowing seed, a knot of amber sap that throbbed with the rhythm of a human heart. "The forest doesn't forget," the creature whispered, but the voice wasn't a mimicry anymore. It was a terrifying, resonant harmony of Elias, my sister, and the hundreds of faces trapped in the walls. It only archives. The hunter pressed the seed against my forehead. It didn't pierce the skin, it melted into it. A sudden blinding heat flooded my nervous system, my vision fractured. I no longer saw the crevice or the monster. I saw the entire Blackwood from above, a vast, conscious lung of wood and bone, breathing in the stray souls of the world to keep its ancient heart beating. I felt my bones begin to soften, turning into the same flexible wooden fiber as the trees. My skin stretched, becoming the translucent parchment of the mosaic walls. My memories, the smell of rain on pavement, the sound of my typewriter, the face of my mother, were being pulled from my brain like silk threads, woven into the great collective tapestry of the forest. The hunter stepped back, its task nearly complete. It looked up at the moon, which was now a pale, uncaring eye in the sky. It let out one final melodic howl, a sound that echoed across the valley, signaling to the town below that the harvest was finished. 10 years have passed since that journey. Hikers still find the old cabin, and sometimes they find a strange tall tree near a limestone crevice. They say the bark looks like a man in mid-stride, and if you press your ear to the trunk, you don't hear the wind. You hear a typewriter. You hear a clock ticking. And if you stay long enough, a small pale hand with a silver birthmark might just reach out from the leaves to welcome you home. The journey didn't end. We just became the destination.